welcome to another episode of Pav fucks something up in his videos. So I was working with this fancy lavalier microphone for this video, get out of the way, and I thought it would be really fun, oh my god, I thought it would be really fun to use this and try out a new recording style, and like this receiver worked with my XLR input and everything. And it was cool, right? But I was watching over the footage, and it turns out there's a bunch of static and a bunch of crackling. And I can't reshoot the video because I'm on a time limit right now. So we're just gonna have to deal with it. I tried to mitigate it as much as I could, but...
I guess I'm a Linux YouTuber now? How's it going, everybody? Galactic Bastard back again with another hot Linux video. This video is both serving as a response to the first Linux video, which you can watch right up here, as well as sort of an update, just to say, you know, how far I've come, what I've learned, what's changed, and just everything that's happened in the past 2 months of me daily driving Linux. This video is also kind of serving as a call to action to those who are looking at Linux and thinking, well, that looks pretty interesting, and there's a lot of features on there that I would probably like, but I just haven't made the switch yet. In case you're out of the loop, Linus Tech Tips and his co-host Luke are challenging each other to daily drive Linux for as long as possible, and to see who can crack first, who can switch back to Windows, who goes the longest daily driving Linux. And I just want to come out here as a pure Linux noob who only made the switch like 2 months ago, that daily driving Linux and switching over to it was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my computing life. Let's go ahead and start off with some minor things, just as a little update for those of you who watched the first video, just to see like where I've come and how I've evolved in my running of Linux as of late. First thing to mention is that I have switched my desktop environment from Pop Cosmic, I believe is what it was called, over to KDE Plasma. And yes, for those of you who are watching and haven't actually used Linux yet, you can install a completely different desktop environment and still use the same operating system. Well, the same SKU of Linux, I should say. I'm still technically running Pop OS, but it just looks different. I customized it more. I made it more my machine. And that's honestly the coolest thing I can say about Linux. The customizability in this, in terms of what you can run, what you can make it look like, all the different modules you can throw onto it, how you want audio to work, we'll get to that in a minute. It's all fully customizable. Another thing I have to mention is that I've installed Proton GE, or Glorious Egg Roll, and it's pretty cool. I like being on the sort of latest bleeding edge version of Proton, but I haven't really used any of its bleeding edge features as of late, so it's mostly just because I wanted to install a different version of Proton, just to try it out and see what's going on with it. And it works just fine. The next thing is about ray tracing in DLSS. So DLSS actually is supported now in the most recent build of Proton Experimental here on Steam. And ray tracing can work in some situations. I've seen it work in some games, but again, I haven't gotten it to run personally, and I don't really care, to be perfectly honest. Just be aware that DLSS and ray tracing should work in some circumstances right now, but again, it's not as seamless as it is on Windows. Another big thing is that I've started streaming again, and I've been streaming entirely off of Linux using OBS. It's been a pretty seamless transition. OBS works exactly the same as it does on Windows, and, you know, working all of my console and PC stuff and switching it over and switching out all of my layouts and everything has been a bit of a pain, but thankfully I'm using Streamlabs and their whole, like, chat box and alert box and everything like that is all stored basically on a website, on a cloud server somewhere, so I didn't have to rebuild any of that stuff. It was just pretty much a browser fucking source that I just threw into OBS, and it all just worked. So if you're an amateur streamer and you're thinking of going to Linux, hey, take it from me. It's been a pretty seamless transition all the way through. The next thing I want to do is I want to look at the first Linux video and just sort of correct myself, because, you know, obviously I made some mistakes, and the old adage still stands true, is that if you want to learn how to do something, make a video about it and put it on the internet, so nerds will come and correct you on every little thing you got wrong. First thing I gotta mention is that I said that D-input controllers work better on Linux for things like emulators and stuff like that, and that's not entirely true. I've since been using the X input mode on my 8BitO controller to run things like Dolphin, and it's been working just fine, honestly. I don't really know why I said that D input is the best option, because X input's been working just fine for me as of late, so yeah, X input's just fine. The next big thing that's happened since the first Linux video is that both BattleEye and Easy Anti-Cheat are available and supported on Linux. So games that use either of those anti-cheats should be fully supported on Linux. But of course there's a catch, it's Linux, what do you expect? The developers of whatever game that uses that anti-cheat basically have to opt in to support on Linux. From what I've heard, it seems to be a relatively drag and drop sort of transition, and it shouldn't really take a whole lot of effort, but some developers care, some developers don't, and most have just sort of not really given any comment on the situation. There are articles from places like The Verge who have reached out to developers and have asked what their plans for support on Linux is. I'll actually provide a link to that article in the description, just so you can see what games you play and if that game is supported on Linux, because I mean shit, if your game is supported on Linux, you really have no excuse at this point. Even so, it's cool that these anti-cheats are supported on Linux, and the more and more people adopt this sort of support, just the easier and easier it'll be for you to switch over to Linux. I mean, I switched over, and I'm an idiot, so if I can do it, you can do it. And now we'll move on to the 3 things that I just straight up couldn't do on Linux at the time of making that first video. We'll go ahead and start off with just the active editing video, because that'll just lead in very nicely to the other 2 topics. So, small confession, I did not edit that first video on Linux. I actually edited that video on Windows. The reason why I edited that video on Windows is because I ran into so many goddamn issues in trying to get DaVinci Resolve to properly work with my specific workflow on Linux. And I want to stress, it's my workflow that was the problem. It's the way that I recorded videos and the way that everything in my setup worked. Let's go ahead and start off with the big thing. The free version of DaVinci Resolve does not support MP4 videos at all. So if you want to edit videos on DaVinci Resolve on Linux, and you don't want to pay the $300, you're gonna have to record in something like MKV or MOV. But I bought the full version, so am I a sucker, or am I someone who just wants convenience over anything else? Obviously I run Linux, so I'm a sucker. And in getting the full version of DaVinci Resolve, I actually got this thing at the same time. The DaVinci Resolve Speed Editor. It's a funny little keyboard that lets me edit videos and use a jog wheel and all that stuff. I'm not gonna go full in-depth on this thing in this video. I'll save that for a future video. So, go ahead and get subscribed, and we'll talk about that later. The other big problem that I ran into in trying to fully switch over my editing workflow to Linux is that it turns out the popular audio codec that is used for editing video and recording video on Windows is, what is it, ACC? ACC audio. It's the big audio codecs that is used on pretty much all Windows and a lot of Mac operating systems. Turns out, ACC is technically a proprietary audio codec. So Linux does support it, and it can support it at the operating system level, but DaVinci Resolve specifically on Linux doesn't support it. And my dad and I were discussing this, and we think the reasoning for this is because the Linux version of DaVinci Resolve, we think it was purposefully built to be used at Pixar specifically. And if you're making a full, big budget, AAA, big cinematic movie, you're not gonna use ACC audio. You're not gonna use any of the shit that a plebeian like me would use. You're gonna be using fully uncompressed video and audio formats. So why bother building in the support for ACC audio when the people you're building this version for aren't gonna use it? I mean, it kind of makes sense. I have no idea if this is accurate or not. And, whatever reason the DaVinci Resolve developers haven't put ACC audio support in Linux yet, it doesn't matter, right? I've been using a program called FFmpeg to essentially re-encode all of my audio into a codec that DaVinci Resolve on Linux can actually read and support. It's a little bit technical, and if you want to know more, you can go ahead and go right here over to my Patreon, where I break all that shit down and give you a good showcase of everything that I do in order to re-encode all my audio and edit it properly on Linux. Yet again, another flawless shill. Aside from those few minor issues, I've been able to fully transfer all of my editing work over to Linux. The downside of this setup, obviously, is that I have to re-encode all of my audio, and it does take up a bit more space when I'm editing it and making the whole video, but when I'm done, the audio still exists on the raw file, so I can just save the raw file and delete the re-encoded audio, and it's, you know, it's fine. If I need to go back and re-edit the video, I'll just re-encode the audio. It's fine. One of the other big things that I talked about in the first Linux video was using a program called Voicemeeter Potato. The way that I used Voicemeeter Potato was essentially to separate my audio when I'm recording things in Windows. So I basically had it set up to where I was being recorded on one audio track, my Discord audio is being recorded on a second audio track, and everything else was just going to the third audio track. And this gave me way more freedom in terms of editing, allowing me to edit my audio and make it sound as good as it possibly can, being able to increase the volume or decrease the volume of any of my Discord calls, and be able to sort of space out conversations. Because unfortunately, people talk over each other when we record videos, so I'm able to sort of fudge conversations a little bit by scooting some audio forward, some audio backward, and making the whole conversation flow so much better in the final product. And also being able to just lower the volume of a video game in post-editing without having to lower the volume of my audio or anyone else's audio. Just straight up giving me way more control, right? And like I said in the first Linux video, that program just isn't available on Linux. So what I did, essentially to work around and also completely rebuild my audio setup on Linux, is I followed this tutorial that basically showed me how to build custom audio syncs and essentially wire all of my audio up through the terminal in text commands. Not the most intuitive thing ever, but eventually I was able to get it to work, and now I can record all of my audio just as I could on Windows. But I am aware about Pipewire and Carla, and at some point I do want to switch over to Pipewire and Carla. The only downside is that Pop! OS is sort of built with Pulse Audio in mind, and Pulse Audio is kind of embedded into Pop! OS at the system level, so that's going to make that transfer a bit awkward. I'll figure out a way that I can do it, and eventually I do want to switch over to Pipewire and Carla, but for now, I'm fine with how everything works right now. I'm just going to keep it the way it is. Another slight downside, and it kind of is and kind of isn't a downside, is that I straight up just don't know how to output those audio syncs to two devices at the same time. So you might notice that there are no speakers on my desk, because all of my audio is being pumped through my headphones. Because I'm going to be perfectly honest, I need those headphones to edit my audio and edit my videos properly. So I thought, I'll just make everything go through the headphones, and I'll just ditch the speakers for now, and I'll try to get that later. Later obviously hasn't come yet. Just more things, more projects I can work on in the future. And that also means more Linux videos, so, you know, a good and bad thing. And the last big thing that I couldn't do on Linux at the start, and I can do it now, is record video game consoles. So I said in the first video that my Elgato capture card just doesn't work on Linux, because Elgato does not support the operating system with their drivers. I'm aware there are ways to essentially rebuild the drivers to work on Linux and make it work and force it to work, but I didn't really want to do that. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. I just didn't want to do that. So instead, I got this thing, the Blackmagic Intensity Pro 4K. So this thing is a capture card intended for like pro video cameras. We actually got this used, so all the stuff on the back is just kind of gone. And it supports all of these analog inputs and outputs, which is really cool. But the thing that I was the most interested in was the HDMI input. And the fact that this capture card basically works the same way as the Elgato one, just has support for Linux. Now, in theory, all of that should have just worked. I should have been able to just plop the card in and just plug in a console, and it would all just work. Install the fucking package that would make it run and everything. Of course, it wasn't that easy. My first problem was actually a problem that wasn't caused by Linux at all, and was in fact caused by my motherboard. On my motherboard, there are two PCIe 16X slots, so the really big slots. Obviously the top one has the most bandwidth, and that's the one that the graphics card goes in. And the rest are PCIe 1X slots. They're the ones that the Elgato capture card would plug into. Turns out that if you have any of those 1X slots populated, the second PCIe slot would be sort of limited to 1X speeds. And that's a bit of a problem because this capture card right here expects at least a 4X bandwidth to properly work. Now, I didn't know that at first, so being me, I'm thinking, oh, you know, I'll keep the Elgato capture card plugged in just so that way I can use it in future videos if I need to. I got a capture card that I can fall back on and just switch back to Windows if I desperately need to use it. Because of the whole, you know, 1X speeds and downsampling all the fucking speeds of the first slot, when I just slotted the card in and turned it on, the video turned out like this. Obviously, not ideal. So I had been sitting and tinkering with this thing for a little bit, and I just didn't understand at all why it wasn't working. I'd watched a bunch of videos online of people just essentially slotting the card in and it would just work. So you can understand my confusion and my frustration. That was until I found a random Blackmagic forums post, and I just was reading through this forum post and I was reading the responses, and I saw that someone mentioned, oh, it could be your motherboard's bandwidth speeds. You know, why don't you check the instruction manual of your motherboard and see what's up with that? And I thought, wait, is that my problem? And so I looked in the instruction manual and read through the PCIe slots and read through all the bandwidth speeds and everything, found out about my specific case with my piece of shit motherboard, and I thought, oh, that's the reason. So I went into the BIOS and completely deactivated all of those 1X slots. And after I disabled all the other ports, sure enough, it just works. And I'm able to record all my consoles, and I'm able to record all this gameplay and do proper big videos for all of this. So I can't plug anything into those slots anymore, but hey, the capture card works now. That's what I've been using to stream Monster Hunter Rise on Twitch. So now I can finally record consoles, I finally have all of my audio separated, and now I can edit all my videos on DaVinci Resolve. At this point, I'm completely detached from Windows. I don't need to go back to Windows at all for any reason at this point. The only reason I would go back to Windows right now is if I wanted to play Halo Infinite. Because at this point, Halo Infinite just does not work on Linux. I played Halo Infinite through the Halo Insider program. It's pretty cool. I really like playing it, but you know, the Insider program, the beta that I got, didn't work on Linux at all, so had to switch over to Windows. So I'm going to make this video also sort of a call out to Microsoft. Hey, if you want people to play your game on the Steam Deck, probably should add support for Linux. Just saying. And those are the big things. You know, I've pretty much fixed all of the problems that I had in the first video. However, I've run into a few problems that I either don't know how to fix or just can't fix because of the problem. The first big thing, and this is something that I didn't expect that I would miss a whole lot, and I didn't expect this to be a problem at all, when you're streaming something on Discord and streaming it through the application, when you're on Linux, it doesn't stream any audio, it only streams video. And I didn't expect that to be as big of a problem as it turned out to be, because turns out, you know, I do a lot of streaming over Discord. You know, because we sometimes do movie nights on my Discord. And so I can't host any of those movie nights, at least not on Linux. Because, you know, if I'm playing a movie, obviously I can't stream over any audio, so it makes things a little bit tricky. And I can't fix that problem. That's not a problem with Linux, that's a problem with Discord. It's just because Discord doesn't support Linux as much as it does on the other platforms. And obviously, why would they? You know, there's like, what, 1% of all PC users out there that use Linux? Why would they put any effort into building their Linux program when they could just instead focus on Windows, where 99% of their user base is going to be. It's a completely understandable problem, but it makes me angry, so Discord, please fix it. In response to this whole situation, I actually just built a bot in my Discord server that would stream my audio separately, and it works, kind of? It's tricky. It uses a custom audio sync in Pulse Audio to essentially route all of my audio through my computer and back into the Discord call, which is neat, and I actually learned a little bit of Python, setting environmental variables, which was kind of cool. So who knows if I'll get into Python programming or not. In doing so, it turns out that the way that I have my Pulse Audio thing set up, it kind of interferes with how everything is set up, so it's kind of really finicky. And if I don't do things exactly right, I have to restart my entire computer to get my defaults back up and running. So while it works, it's not something I use at all right now. But hey, I learned how to build a Discord bot, and I learned a little bit about Python, so net gain. One last thing that's just really weird, and I don't quite know how to explain it. I've run into a couple of audio, I'll just call them glitches, on OBS. And I have no idea if this is because of Pulse Audio, or because of how I have everything set up, or because of Linux in general. So when I'm playing a console game on my computer right here, I have to use OBS to essentially pump the video into my computer and then just have a projector be on my big monitor right here, and I play my game off of that. But obviously I can't hear any of that audio. So what I do is I just have OBS like monitor the audio, and I can hear it, and I can pump it out to my stream, and I can record everything, and it just works, right? Well, let's say I wanted to turn the game down. So I go into the OBS audio slider, the volume slider right here, and I slide the volume down, and it makes the audio that I hear louder. Now, on the stream and on the recording, it works just like normal. It does, in fact, turn the volume down, and I can see it be turned down. But when the audio gets played through my headphones, it gets louder for some reason. And I have no idea what could be causing that. I did a little bit of digging, but pretty much nobody's run into this problem. So if you know anything about Pulse Audio, or Linux audio in general, or OBS, anything really, go ahead and leave a comment down in the comments section. I would love to know, like, why this is happening, and I'd love to know a possible fix for it, because it's really fucking annoying. And that's kind of it. That's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. Linux has been a really, really interesting process for me. The fact that I've sat down and really learned about Linux and sort of gone through all the motions and have put myself through not so much a nightmare, but just a bunch of minor annoyances and inconveniences, I have learned quite a bit. And frankly, I just know more about the operating system and know how to better utilize my hardware. And I kind of want to dispel the sort of image that Linux has with a lot of people, where it's just like, oh, you know, haha, Linux users installing a fucking web browser or whatever. It's like, yeah, like, I know they're memes, and a lot of other people know that they're memes, but some people take those memes as fact, and they sort of have this image in their head of Linux being like the turbo nerd operating system that you can't use and you can't understand unless you're a master at bash commands, which they don't even know what the fuck bash is. So, like, you have to use a terminal for everything, and it's super complicated, and yada, 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 yada. Obviously, that's not the case. I'm an idiot, right? I dropped out of college, so if I'm able to make the transition over to Linux, anybody else can. Like, all you gotta do is you just need to have a little bit of know-how, like just a little bit. You're obviously not going to be able to get your grandma to switch over to Linux. I mean, that'd be actually an interesting experiment. You need a little bit of know-how, and you need just a good amount of patience. You just need to have the patience to properly troubleshoot your problems. Because you will run into problems, you will run into unnecessary bullshit, but you're gonna run into the same shit on Windows. Like, you're gonna run into just as much insane, unnecessary, esoteric bullshit on Windows, but it's just a little bit different on Linux just because you have total control over your hardware. See, on Windows, everything's sort of locked down, and the operating system sort of treats you as a little baby and is like, oh, you know, oh, you can't use this because it's being used by the operating system. And it's like, bitch, I own you? You are my computer? Why are you not letting me do this? Like, that shit's just not, that whole situation is just not a thing on Linux. And that's the big bonus that you get when you switch over, is that you just get more control over your system. And that's exactly why I'm gonna suggest all of you watching this video, if you're not already running Linux, just try it. Like I said in the first video, you can run the entire operating system off of a flash drive. So, if anything, just go ahead, get a flash drive, write an ISO to it. I recommend Pop! OS, but you can do whatever, and just try it. You know, there's nothing wrong with trying. And if you end up not liking it afterwards, totally understandable, totally reasonable, and you have every right after you've tried it to dismiss it and say like, oh, you know, it's just not for me. Because I get it. Not everyone is going to be compatible with Linux. But at least try, man. Like, it's so easy, and you get so much more out of it than you do on Windows. And so, now that this whole spiel is over and I've gone over everything, let's go ahead and respond to some comments. I feel like that'd be a lot of fun. A .deb, .rpm, or whichever file format other distros use, proper term is the package, yeah, is like a zip archive that contains your application or library along with the installation of instructions and listed dependencies that need to be installed for it to work. Okay, so, that's one of the things that I just straight up forgot to mention. So, I said in the first video that there are two big types of formats of files that I saw, at least that I saw, right? And I said that they were Debians and Flatpaks. So I was I was told that the term Debian actually isn't correct, and the more proper term is Debian package, because Debian is actually a SKU of Linux. And like, yeah, all right, I got that wrong. I'm admitting that I got that wrong, and the proper term is Debian package. But can you blame me? I had been using Linux for like 2 weeks at that point, so still learning stuff. Deleting keys from your BIOS. Literally the first time I've ever heard of someone doing that to install Linux. Yeah, so apparently not everyone has to delete their Windows secure boot keys in order to install Linux. For whatever reason, my motherboard decided that no, I had to delete my Windows secure boot keys. I don't really know what was causing it. Maybe it was just some fucking thing on my motherboard. Maybe it was because of Windows. I don't know. But I just said that everyone should just do it just to be safe, you know? Because I ran into problems with it, so I didn't want to have to go through the whole problem of like, oh, you know, someone goes through all my solutions and goes through my steps, and then they run into a problem that I didn't run into, so it's just kind of, you know. Proton on Flatpak is harder to run because starting from version 5.13 plus, it uses the Steam Linux runtime, which is like a container for your games, and tried running a container inside a container as well. Yeah, so apparently Steam on Flatpak actually does work in some cases. I don't know what the fuck I was doing. I don't know why it didn't work for me. But as soon as I switched over to a Debian package, it all just worked. And so, you know, just part of the process. Good video, and great job figuring out what your problem was and fixing it. There are so many people that can't be bothered to do that and just give up right away. Now, yes, that is a big thing about Linux, and it's something that I did mention in this video. It's just that you gotta have the right mindset of being like, all right, I'm gonna fix this problem, instead of just letting it pass by you. It's just a whole mindset thing, and it's something that you kind of need to have to switch over to Linux, but it's not a hard mindset to have. It really isn't that hard. If this was the most frustrating thing you've ever done, I want to see you install Arch Linux. It's also completely worth it. Quick stuff about Flatpaks. They're amazing if you know how they work. The sandboxing that you experience is a great privacy feature to make sure any apps don't dig around where you don't want them to, kind of like Android permissions. You can definitely change permissions through the terminal, but a better way to do this is use Flat Seal. A big issue with Flatpaks for me is that the GNOME theme does not carry over the Flatpak app. So, yeah, I did mention that in the first video, that Flatpaks sort of sandboxed and are sort of kept inside their own little walled garden, right? And that is a very good security measure, right? If you want to make sure an app doesn't fuck with anything on your system, you know, use a Flatpak and keep it in its little walled garden. While that is a fantastic solution and a great security measure, it just interferes with a lot of how Linux, Ubuntu specifically, with how it all properly works. And I personally am not a fan of Flatpaks, but I do see their potential, and I do see how they can be used to greater methods of success later down the line. Doesn't mean I'm going to switch over all my apps to Flatpaks, though. Sorry. Oh, by the way, try Manjaro. I like Arch Linux better than Debian, just because updates come faster, plus KDE Plasma worked way better for me as a layout, and is a lot like Windows. I didn't start loving Linux till I saw KDE, so yes, yes. I did install KDE Plasma, and it is much nicer for me. You know, it's basically kind of like a not Windows setup. You know, I'm a big fan of it. I'm a big fan of the customization and the themes used in KDE Plasma. So, you know, just another little thing you can do to further increase your customizability of the software. Which is really cool. Oh, and one thing I just completely forgot to mention. Because of the amazing customization of KDE Plasma, I was able to turn my mouse cursor into the Wii Remote's hand pointer that you see on the console, and I think that's just so fucking funny to me. It reminds me of like the dumb malware-riddled mouse software that you would see that would change how your mouse cursor looked, like it'd be a burning fire sword or the Pope or some shit. But in this, it's built into the system, and there's no malware at all, so good shit. Very good vid, man. You seem like a normal human. Hard to find these days. What do you mean by that? What do you mean I seem like a normal human? Whatever, I gave it a like. I don't fucking care. It's a Debian package, not a Debian. Debian is a distribution, and Deb are the Debian packages. Sorry, I had to say this. I'm involved with the Debian project. Yes, 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 okay. So I got that wrong. I'm sorry. Moving on. I was in the same boat regarding Voicemeeter, and it really screwed me over. However, get rid of Pulse Audio and Jack, and install Pipewire and Carla. This is basically Voicemeeter on steroids. Yes, 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 yes. I did mention that. I do want to switch over to Pipewire and Carla eventually, but that's just sort of a deep, you know, system-level project that I need to really take a lot of care and attention in making it work properly. This is like a weekend project for me, so at some point I will, but just later. Install Synaptic instead of using the Pop Shop. Okay, so another big thing. A lot of hardcore Linux users don't like using the Pop Shop, as its repositories aren't exactly up to date. So the files that you're going to download from that basically storefront just aren't the most up to date, right? And so they'll say, oh, download and install the Synaptic Package Manager. And yeah, that is something I could do. I don't give a shit. More truthfully, in installing KDE Plasma, I have also installed the Discover repository, storefront, whatever. I haven't had any problems with this package manager. Maybe at some point I'll install Synaptic, but, you know, I'm not really hurting for it, so meh. What if I tell you you can use AMD FSR for any Windows game on Linux using custom Proton GE or Lutris and gain a significant performance boost without damaging visuals? So yes, that is a thing that I just didn't know about and frankly haven't actually tried on my system. Hence why I haven't really talked about it in this video. You can use this piece of AMD software called their Super Fidelity Resolution, or whatever the fuck they call it, to essentially bake it in at the system level and force compatibility with every single piece of Windows software on things like Steam or Lutris, and essentially double your FPS in any game, right? Now that's really cool sounding, and I do want to give that a shot, but just haven't really had the time to do it yet, you know? That's another, like, you know, I'll sit down for a day and tinker with it kind of project, you know? Just haven't had the time for it. Do want to do it, but haven't done it yet. The terminal is not required to use Linux, although it does depend on the distro, but why the fuck would you not want to use the terminal? It's objectively the best way to use a computer, particularly Linux. Is it a bit of a learning curve? Sure, kind of like driving, but after you get your license, can you imagine yourself without using one ever again? And also like driving, everything is easier and you are way more productive after you get your first car/terminal. Everyone goes on about productivity tools, but the best productivity tool is the terminal, and Vim. Now, I don't know what the fuck Vim is, and I don't care. The reason I made that first video with no terminal required and no terminal commands at all was because I wanted that video to essentially be like a gateway, right? I started using Linux, and I want to show my, baby brain 2-week time frame using Linux, and I want to show people that it really isn't that scary, and you don't need to use the terminal for every single thing, right? I can understand that the terminal is very cool, and it does a lot of cool stuff, and you can be very productive with the terminal, right? I'm not scared of the terminal personally. I use it all the time for things like FFmpeg, but you can't just go up to a normal person and expect them to be able to use the terminal for everything they're doing. You gotta wean them into it, I was weaned into it, and now I'm totally comfortable with the terminal. It's one of those things that you can't expect someone to know just incredibly detailed information on their first day of using Linux. So I understand your point and that you really love the terminal, because I love the terminal too, but just for that video, I wanted to keep that shit down to a minimum, just for the sake of all the new users who might be watching that video. The Arch Wiki is a great resource for quickly looking up how a given program or system tool functions and how it can be tweaked or how the common issues can be troubleshooted. Most of the stuff there can be applied to any other distro as well. So yes, actually, that's one thing I didn't know about, and I honestly haven't used the Arch Wiki a whole lot, but I do want to point that out in this video, that if you are watching this video and you're kind of scared about using Linux and you don't quite know where to start, I would suggest that you try the Arch Wiki. I've heard nothing but good things about it, so, what's harm in at least looking there, Everyone wiki dives at some point, so might as well do an Arch Wiki dive. Side note, I knew this vid was worth watching when I saw you wear 2 different Rush t-shirts. Yeah. Hope you can check out the Arch distro in the future. Want to hear your opinion on that as well. All right, what the fuck's up with Arch Linux? Okay, so I know that Arch Linux is kind of a meme amongst Linux users, like the whole oh, I use Arch by the way, like that kind of shit. I'm not switching anytime soon, right? I'm comfortable on Pop! OS right now, and I don't think I'm going to be doing any distro hopping, at least until later. Maybe whenever I get my Steam Deck, that'll be the proper way that I'll be able to fiddle around with Arch and try out all that stuff, because SteamOS is based on Arch. Or maybe if I get another computer set up and running, maybe I can use that to fuck around with Arch. But I'm not going to switch over on my main machine just yet. I'm perfectly comfortable with how everything's working right now.
And now, the greatest comment left by anyone ever.
Oh, jeez. Oh, fuck. Oh, God. What the fuck? What?
I would be interested to know how you edit your videos on Linux. Well, actually, if you want some in-depth, very technical talks about how I edit my videos, you can go over to my Patreon right here. And speaking of my Patreon, let's go ahead and thank the patrons, otherwise known as the Executive Lads, for helping me make this video possible and helping me achieve my goal of being a full-time YouTuber. Hasn't happened yet, but I swear it'll happen eventually. On my Patreon, you can get access to behind-the-scenes videos, access to videos a whole day early, and we have an exclusive Don't Buy This tier. Here's a pro tip, don't buy it. Hope you enjoyed this video, hope you enjoyed the last one. If you want, you can check out my latest video, my latest big tutorial video where I show off how to operate the Citra emulator. And fun fact, I actually did that whole tutorial on Linux. So, that's pretty cool, right? Hope you have a good day, everybody.